Jim Bouton, this is Bob Lazzari and Tony D'Angelo here in Eastern Connecticut. Thanks for joining us, Jim.
Good evening, Jim.
How you doing, guys?
We're doing okay, Jim, again, and it's an honor, and I thank you
Certainly.
for your cooperation
Good evening.
and willingness to come on the show. And from a personal standpoint, I've said this before on the show. Jim, I lost my father last summer, and he was a huge baseball fan of the 60s and 70s. And he always would, he was a pitcher's kind of fan, would love to talk about some of the great pitchers of the 60s, 70s, Juan Marichal, Bob Gibson. And I remember him also saying that Jim Bouton had two hell of a good years back then. And he always liked you, and he read the book, and so there'll be always, I'll have fond memories of that. And ironically, Jim, when he passed away, he had a bulldog puppy. So I just have to, that is still at home right now. So thanks on his behalf for all the great memories he gave my dad.
Thank you. You know, there's something about baseball that connects fathers and sons.
Sure does. Absolutely. And for
Yes.
our younger fans out there, Tony, Mr. Bouton really doesn't need an introduction, but he did play 10 seasons between 62 and 78, a 21-game winner, Tony, in 1963 when he was an All-Star. 39 wins combined in 63 and 64. Of course.
Hey, don't forget my 2 World Series wins, so I get 41 wins.
That's right.
Jim, I'm old enough to have seen them both.
And Jim's right. 2-1 with a 1.48 ERA,
Yeah.
Tony, in World Series play.
That's right.
Of course, the controversial, the book Ball 4, Combination Diary of the 69 season, Tony, the memoir years of the Yankees, Pilots, Houston Astros. In 96, Jim was featured in the Sports 100, the 100 most important people in American sports history, Tony. That was put out by Macmillan. Again, there's a Time Magazine, 100 greatest nonfiction books of all time. Ball 4
right.
back, of course, was published in 70. And we can go on and on. We could do the whole show on Jim's bio, but I want to just get in right to the questions. First of all, Jim, you were born in Newark, of course. High school out in Illinois. I just was wondering, as you get drafted by the Yankees franchise, a legendary franchise in '59, your feelings at the time, having grown up, well, having been born in Newark. I wanted to know what was going through your mind when the Yankees drafted you.
Well, first of all, this was before the draft. This was in 1959 when colleges did not take the function of minor league baseball the way they have now. The Yankees had 15 minor league farm teams. Most major league teams had 14 or 15 farm teams.
Wow.
I was signed after my freshman year in college. I was a walk-on at Western Michigan University. I was a bench warmer in high school. My nickname was Warm-Up Bouton because I never got into the games. So I was really what you would call a late bloomer. The Yankees wanted to sign me to a contract because they saw me pitch in a tournament in Battle Creek, Michigan. It was a national championship. I was the number 5 pitcher on our team, and we had to play against the best team in the tournament in a double elimination. And the newspapers were saying that the Chicago team will be eliminated because they have their number 5 pitcher going against this team from Cincinnati. They hadn't scored fewer than 18 runs in a game. Anyway, there were Sunday afternoon. There were about 200 scouts in the stands, and I shut this team out. We won 2-0. I struck out 10 guys, and when the game is over, I started walking toward the dugout, and before I got to the foul line, here they were, 200 scouts running with their little notepads. Where are you from? We never heard of you. Where did you play high school? What's your phone number? So it was really basically that one game in front of all those scouts that got the Yankees interested in offering me a minor league contract.
Isn't that something? And I read somewhere, Jim, that your goal of becoming a major leaguer at one time you thought was unrealistic, so you actually focused on becoming a forest ranger. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I remember
Wow.
we had to do a careers week report in high school, and my guidance counselor said, you know, it's unrealistic to think that you could ever be a professional baseball player. So why don't you do something that suits your personality? And I was a squirrel in high school, so I thought, well, if I could I'll do a report on a forest ranger, and I can be with all the other squirrels in the woods. So that was my report. I think I got a C in the writing part of it, and I got an A on the cover with a very nice picture of a squirrel in a tree.
Oh, there's a joke about nuts there somewhere, Tony. But that's great stuff. And here, all of a sudden, Tony, Jim's in the majors in '62.
Yeah.
He gets 7 victories. He starts 16 games. And Jim, was it true that you were slated to start Game 7 of the World Series that year versus the Giants, but then you were bumped due to a rain postponement?
Yeah, in '62, I was going to be pitching because we ran out of we a couple sore arms, and so Ralph Houck didn't announce who the next pitcher was going to be. I think it was the 7th game, and so I figured it was going to be me, because I was a rookie that year. I had a pretty good finish. I was 7-7, but I won 4 or 5 down the stretch. And but they didn't announce who the pitcher was going to be the next day, and so right away I thought it was going to be me, and so did everybody else. But then it rained for 3 days in San Francisco, and I got rained out. And by that time, Ralph Terry had enough rest from an earlier game that he pitched, and he ended up shutting out the Giants 1-0. That's the ball where McCovey hit a line drive to Bobby Richardson right to him, and that was the game.
Wow, and the Yankees were world champions. Again, folks, on the phone with the legendary Jim Bouton. Tony, question for Jim?
And good evening, Jim. And just for a moment here, I have to call you Bulldog. And now that I've got that out of the way, because that's how I remember you coming up, that cap flying off and that big stride. And I said to myself, man, this is a guy that's not real big, but he really could throw the ball. And when did you know you really had that, pardon the term, big league fastball?
Well, I didn't know I had a big league fastball, but I did have a very good overhand curveball. And I actually learned that when I was a kid. I had an overhand curveball that was dropped off a table when I was about 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And I perfected that. And when a child learns something like that, like how to throw a curveball or a knuckleball or play a musical instrument, it's something you have for the rest of your life. And I really, got by on my overhand curveball. It's funny you should mention the 1962 season, because yesterday was the 50th anniversary of my first start in the big leagues at Yankee Stadium. And I had left 35 passes in the stands for my brothers, my family, my father, mother, uncles, cousins, neighbors. And so I walk out to the mound, and I walk the first batter on 4 pitches. Then I walked the second batter, and I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, am I ever going to get anybody out? They started warming up in the bullpen. The third batter, I walked him, too. Oh, my God. My father said that during that first inning, my brother had two cigarettes going at the same time. So the fourth batter is up there. The bullpen is warming up. I go 3-1 on the batter, and then I throw a pitch that's a little bit above the belt, and Ralph Houck steps out of the dugout to come get me. But the umpire called it a strike, and so I got another pitch, and he popped it up, and I got out of the inning. And then I ended up pitching a complete game shutout. It was the worst shutout in the history of baseball. They gave up 7 hits, 7 walks. I pitched the entire game from the stretch position. And after the game, Ralph Houck said to me, any more shutouts like that, and we're going to need a new bullpen.
Going to need a lot more than that. That's some story. But, yes, can you imagine 50 years ago, Tony?
50 years ago yesterday. And you want to know the best part of it? When the game, and that's the game where Elston Howard gave me my nickname. The sports writers went to him after the game and said, what do you think of this kid Bouton in his first start in the big leagues? He said, he's a real bulldog. So that's where the name came from, Elston Howard. Anyway, after the game was over, I was in the dugout for a few minutes doing an interview with Red Barber, and the great radio guy, radio broadcaster. And so I got to the clubhouse a little bit late, and when I opened the clubhouse door, I saw a path of white towels from the door over to my locker, and Mickey Mantle was laying down the last towel in front of my locker. I got the white carpet treatment from the Mick. That's something you never forget.
How can you? I mean, what a story that is, and what a way to basically earn your stripes in the big leagues. And Jim, in 1963, I'm trying to go sequentially here, Tony. In '63, of course, you're in the World Series again here, and you face these Dodgers. Now, Jim lost to Don Drysdale 1-0 in Game 3.
I listened to that game on a transistor radio.
And I
coming
told
from
you
my
the other
school
day,
bus.
Tony, when we were
Yes.
communicating, the Dodgers used 4 pitchers the entire series. Jim, how good were these guys when you were watching them from the bullpen or wherever? How
Yes.
good were the Dodger pitchers in that series?
Well, Drysdale and Koufax, were phenomenal. As a matter of fact, they were so good and so overpowering. They teamed up. I don't know if you remember this. They teamed up and formed a 2-man union, and
I do remember that.
and demanded
Yes.
to negotiate, a better contract for themselves. And the Dodgers, made them hold out and sit out, and eventually, they crumbled and ended up signing, these pitifully small contracts.
Right.
But that was the first attempt at a 2-man union, Drysdale and Koufax, and boy, I tell you, they had the stuff. Koufax's delivery, his windup, is so flawless and just perfectly smooth. It was a marvel, and it looked like the ball was going to be coming in slowly because his motion was just nice and smooth, and boom, it was on you. It was, Mickey could never, catch up to that pitch.
Wow, and that's the great Mickey Mantle. The pitching was just too incredible, and of course, they get back to the World Series, Tony, in '64, and of course they're facing Gibson and the Cardinals.
Yes.
And Jim wins 2 World Series games, complete game in Game 3, and also won 8-3 in Game 6. Both starts versus Kurt Simmons, and must have some great memories of that World Series, Jim, to win 2 ball games, and you're still relatively very young.
Very young at that
Must
point.
be some great memories of the '64 World Series.
Yeah, I was hoping that Yogi would start me in that series because I had a really strong finish at the end of the '64 season, and if they had started me, we would have won the World Series because I outpitched Bob Gibson, although I wasn't pitching against him in any games. I beat Kurt Simmons twice, but if
Right.
I had pitched my games and Bob Gibson had pitched the games he pitched, I win all 3 games. I would have been the most valuable player, and I would have got the car. I always remind Gibson about that. You're lucky I didn't start that series.
Yeah, car back then was something. right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what you
that was
got.
a big deal. That was like worth, that was like doubling your salary.
Wow. Again, folks, on the phone with the legendary Jim Bouton. As we talk, we have a nice collage on the
We
TV
do.
screen of certain shots of Jim over the years, posing with the book ball for, as well as his playing days. Tony, question?
And Jim, actually, 64, we have a situation of you guys going down valiantly in the World Series. And then 65, there's some managerial changes. And it seems like, what I remember and what history will tell is it seemed like all of the pitchers, including yourself that year, turned up lame. It's like, what was the 65 year like, being a Yankee?
Well, a lot of the guys, were just sort of like we all got old. I wasn't, really old, but my body was, worn out. I had thrown too many pitches in 1963 and '64. I was pitching on 4 days rest, 3 days rest, every 4 days out there, and I pitched a lot of complete games. I think I had over 250 innings in each season. So, looking back on it now, I realize, okay, that's why my arm was dead. I was pitching too much.
Sure.
If they had pitched me the way they do now, which is 4 days rest, and or take a guy out after 7 innings or 100 pitches, whatever comes first, I could have had a much longer career. But I'm not blaming anybody because I wanted the ball, and that's the way we did it. That's
Sure.
the way. You went out there and you pitched until you dropped, and then they bring
And then he
somebody else
did.
into the bullpen. But looking back, I realized that's why I had a dead arm in 1965, and then we had a lot of injuries. Maris got injured, Mantle got injured, Ralph Terry got injured, Whitey Ford couldn't pitch anymore. I mean, it was just all at once, and they had fired Yogi Berra, even though he got us to the World Series
Right.
the year before. They fired him actually before the season was
I was
over.
going
and
to
he
ask
didn't know it. And had by that time traded for Johnny Keane, who was struggling in the National League with the Cardinals, and so both managers, the Yogi who got secretly fired before the season was over, and Johnny Keane, who hadn't signed a new contract because the Cardinals weren't going to sign him again. So here was Yogi Berra managing against the future manager of the Yankees, who had already signed a deal with the Yankees. It was the strangest thing.
It was.
But Johnny Keane was a very nice man, a religious man, a fine man, but he was the wrong guy for the Yankees. I mean, we had a party team, and it was like putting Billy Graham in charge of the Hells Angels. It was not a good mix.
Yeah, that you can't say it any better. We looked at the roster, Tony,
Yeah.
and it was something at the time. But that would have been my next question. I was going to ask you about. Well, I should tell our viewers, Tony, that Jim did lead the league in starts, 37 starts in '64.
Yeah.
Had started 30 in '63. Like he said, a lot of pitches. Did bounce back to pitch very well in '66. Very incredible ERA that year, but it seemed like the innings had taken their toll,
Yeah.
and then it was mostly relief after that. But then we're going to fast forward, Jim, a little bit up to the '69 season. Here you find yourself with the expansion Seattle Pilots, Tony, right? Which ultimately becomes the backdrop of the whole Ball 4 thing, and traded later that season to Houston. But I just wanted to get your thoughts at the time, Jim, of a Seattle franchise, the whole expansion thing in general at the time. It must have been so bizarre.
Yeah, well, in 1968, the Yankees sold me to the Seattle Pilots. They didn't even have a team then, but they were starting to stockpile players for the 1969 season. And so I was pitching in Seattle for the last year of their AAA season there, the Seattle Rainiers. And I said to myself, well, the only way I'm going to stay in the big leagues is if I resurrect the knuckleball that I threw as a kid. I just don't have the arm strength anymore, dead arm. So I went to the minor leagues, and I started throwing a knuckleball that I had thrown when I was younger, and son of a gun, it started coming around, and I had a really good finish that summer. And the following spring in 1969, I was a non-roster player, but I still made the ball club with my knuckleball, and I spent most of the season with the Seattle Pilots, and then they traded me to the Houston Astros at the end of the season. But that was the year I kept a diary,
Right.
because all of my life, all of my career, I mean, I always wanted to share the fun and the nonsense of baseball, what it's like on a baseball team.
Right.
And I couldn't have had a better team, because the Seattle Pilots were made up of players nobody else wanted. It was an expansion team, a bunch of guys being thrown together, and now they're just getting to know each other. So they're all telling each other their stories all summer long. So I'm getting all the Detroit Tiger stories from Ray Oyler, and the Kansas City stories from John O'Donohue, and the Cleveland Indian stories from Gary Bell. And it was like, it's as if somebody put this team together and said, well, they're not going to win very many games, but if somebody writes a book, this is a hell of a ball club.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I should tell our viewers, in Seattle, Tony, Jim was 2-1. He appeared in 57 games, 3.9 ERA.
Yes.
And, of course, that before being traded to Houston. But Joe Schultz, the manager, I believe Sal Magli was the pitching coach at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on Sal, Jim? Or
Well, Sal was not a fan of the knuckleball. Very few
okay.
managers are, or pitching coaches are, fans of the knuckleball. They don't like it because they don't know how to teach it. It's unpredictable, and the problem with the knuckleball is it's very hard to control, and so you end up walking a lot of guys. But on the other hand, because the ball is so hard to hit, you don't give up many hits.
Right.
So if you walked 5 guys and gave up 4 hits, they would say, yeah, but you walked 5 guys. I said, yeah, but there's only 9 base runners, and at least a walk only moves the runners over 1 base, whereas a hit moves runners 2 bases.
Right.
But they could never, figure that out. And so, a knuckleball pitcher was sort of an orphan on the team. And then you have the situation where catchers don't want to catch you because the ball jumps around at the last minute and it injures them. And I can't blame them for that.
Yeah.
Broken fingers and that kind of thing. So it was just one of those things. Sal did not like the knuckleball.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we talked to Ed Herman, who caught
Yes.
Wilbur Wood, and he said the same thing, Jim. It wasn't the the most fun thing to do. But I guess people look at the speed of it and say it's too hittable, but they never try to hit
It's a little
against
different
it,
when
right?
you're close up to it.
But here, 1970, Tony, Ball 4 is published.
Right.
You know, it basically chronicles a side of baseball that was previously unseen. When it first came out, Jim, did you have any idea of the uproar? Probably not, but any of the uproar and the negativity as far as on the parts of your fellow players that it might have?
Well, I knew it was going to be, controversial to some extent because I was writing things that, hadn't really been written about before. Most sports writers don't have the access to locker rooms and bullpens and dugouts and the roof of a hotel, that kind of thing. So I had access that they didn't have. The other thing was that there was some excerpts from the book appeared 3 months before the book actually came out.
Yes,
These were the most.
I had the magazine.
These were the most controversial parts of the book, and of course the sports writers were furious at me because I was writing things that they hadn't written. And Dick Young in particular wrote 3 consecutive columns in the New York Daily News calling me a social leper and a Judas and a Benedict Arnold and everything you can think of.
I remember reading that.
Yeah, and Dick Young was angry because the name of his column that he'd been, this for his entire career was called Clubhouse Confidential. So here was a guy coming along, and he's really saying what's confidential in the clubhouse.
Yeah, that's. We remember Dick well, Tony, and
for sure.
he had some, shall we say, disagreements with a lot of people over the years.
Some very acute views.
Yeah, I'm sure he thought, of course, Jim was stepping in his territory, et cetera, and ball players just play ball, and this is what made the book such a entertaining and so controversial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's great stuff. Again, folks, on the phone, Jim Bouton with us tonight. Tony, question.
And Jim, when I think of you, I think of the fact of when you were writing the book, I was kind of getting into high school, and I saw you in the 1968 Olympics protesting against apartheid, and I saw you as a literate person. And then I saw you in Ball 4, and you were telling us what athletes were really like, and I thought to myself, what is this? Ball players are he's different than the other ball players. And obviously, I think you kind of brought us to a dimension that, we had never envisioned, that ball players indeed are human. And do you think over the years you've paid maybe a heavy price for that?
Well, I was always considered, an oddball. You have to remember that back in the 1960s and long before that, most players had little more than a high school education.
Right.
There were very few guys who had been to college even for a year or so, and these were not readers. If you were on a team bus going to, the airport or something like that, and you were reading a paperback book, they would nickname you the professor. Mm-hmm. These are small town guys, rural guys just off the farm, out of the mines. Small towns, very conservative people. They just wanted to play ball, and they were happy to do that as opposed to what it was going to be like if they went home working on the farms again. And so they were happy to, play for whatever amount of money anybody was willing to pay them, and they were just happy to be ball players. And so somebody who comes along like me, talking about, civil rights and,
right.
the war in Vietnam and all that stuff. Hey, shut up about that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to hear it. So it was a very conservative environment, and so anybody who had an opinion about, what was going on in the world was really a weirdo. And you paid a price for it. Some bullpen arguments and stuff resulted. Mm-hmm. But I thought these characters were more interesting than today's players. Today's players are much more sophisticated. They're college educated. Most of them, they've got some, they're worldly. They're sophisticated. They're hip to what's going on. Very very unlike guys in my day who were innocents, really vulnerable guys at the mercy of this game that. They were dying to play, and poorly treated, poorly, the minimum salary was $7,000, if you can believe that. My average salary for 8 years in the major leagues came to $19,000. Everybody knew we were being underpaid, but guys didn't want to do anything about it. They didn't want to argue. They didn't want to, a union was the last thing they wanted. These are conservative guys. They grew up in homes where unions were bad, considered to be a bad thing, and
right.
so
or communist, yeah,
communistic, and so it was very hard to get these guys to think about, how poorly they were being treated. One of the most satisfying things for me about Ball 4 is that it became part of the evidence against the owners in the arbitration hearing in 1975. This is 5 years after the book came out. Was the only player called to testify at the Andy Messersmith trial and arbitration hearing, and the arbitrator accepted Ball 4 as legal evidence because I had all my original notes. And Ball 4 was the first book to tell people how hard it was to make a living, and how the owners, it documented, almost every player on the team had a story about how he'd been taken advantage of by a general manager or a team owner. And the arbitrator used that evidence as part of his judgment, in which was that the players should not be lifetime. These should not be lifetime contracts. They should be one-year contracts, and that's when the free agency began the following year.
And I think after a while, Tony, Jim's credibility was so high. Of course, Commissioner Bowie Kuhn tried to, he called Ball 4, quote unquote, detrimental to baseball.
Yes.
But, and he wanted Jim to basically sign off saying, this is fiction, but hey, it was new. And what Jim stresses and what's coming across is that these guys, that even though they were underpaid, Tony, they just had a lot of fun, because I tell you, I read Ball 4. I read Joe, You Could Have Made Us Proud in '75. And long before this, Jim Brosnan had written The Long Season. Now, this was back in 1959. I read it, of course, much later. But he had encountered some resistance like yourself. I was wondering if you ever got to talk to him and compare your mutual experiences with Brosnan.
No, I never met him.
No?
But I read The Long Season when it first came out, as you said, in 1959, and I thought it was a wonderful book. What really excited me about the book was when he would quote the players. This is what a major league player is saying in the dugout during a game. This is what the guys in the bullpen are talking about. This is what they're talking about on the bus rides, and so I remembered that. So when I was keeping notes for Ball 4, what I would write down is the quotes. I could remember what the story was by the quotes. So at the end of the day, I would spread my notes out on the bed, and I'd have dozens and dozens of notes on scraps of paper and my little notepad that I had, and then I'd run out of that, and then I'd write on hotel stationery or air sickness bags on the plane or cocktail napkins, whatever was handy. But it was all quotes, because I found that if I didn't write something down right away, exactly right after somebody said something, I would even 2 minutes later, 5 minutes later, I'd forget exactly how they phrased it. And so I would write the quotes down. All my notes have quotes on them. And then at the end of the day, the quote would remind me what the story was, and so I would talk my notes into the tape recorder. That's why Ball 4 sounds like somebody talking, is because it actually was. It was a spoken book.
Yeah, it's true, and I'm sure.
Hey, by the way, while we're on this topic of speaking, you may not be aware that Ball 4 is now available as an ebook, and it's available as an Audible book read by me. I just finished recording it about a month ago, and it's now available on audible.com.
Wow.
Isn't that nice?
That must have been some experience. I would think emotional at some points, Jim.
Oh, tremendously emotional, because it covers, the original book in 1970, then it includes the update in 1980, 1990, and the one in 2000, where I was finally invited back to Old Timers Day at Yankee Stadium after 28 years.
Yeah, that was very emotional. I know that. Tony, question?
And Jim, as far as you coming out of baseball, and I was in high school in the early 70s in New York, and you started to appear on Channel 7 Eyewitness News, and I love Channel 7 Eyewitness News. I love Bouton and Grinsby and Tex Antoine and seeing you and Gifford. And it seems like you guys really had a good time and you all got along well. And what was that experience like?
Oh, that was a lot of fun. Being a television sportscaster, I was surprised at how they would just, wing it. I remember they said to me, I was going to be starting in September after the baseball season was over, and they said, well, I said, I really, I've never handled a microphone. I really don't know, what it's like to be a reporter. They said, well, come in a day ahead of time, and we'll practice. We'll do some practice with you. And I said, okay, great. So I showed up the day before I was supposed to go on the air, and when I walked in, they said, boy, are we glad to see you. Denny McLean just got called in by the baseball commissioner's office. Take a camera crew and get over to the commissioner's office right now and do a story from the commissioner's office about his meeting with Denny McLean. I said, wait a minute. I said, today was supposed to be my practice day. I don't even know how to hold the microphone. They said, very, very simple. Just make sure that the WABC is facing the camera.
And you're able to make that happen.
Oh,
that was
please.
it.
That is great stuff.
But we had a wonderful team.
It really showed.
The Eyewitness News team with Bill Bouton and Roger Grinsby and Mel Battoliver and Geraldo Rivera and Tex Antoine and
Yeah, we were just watching the
it was
promos
almost
the
as
other
wild as
day.
that baseball team.
It was great, Jim. The promos on YouTube were just fantastic.
You guys, you just looked, they had such a great time.
Yeah, it was great. And then, of course, he went on to CBS, and that was great. I used to watch him
Yeah.
when I was down in New York and everything. But it was so he did so much in the 70s. It was amazing. But just one more. I want to just revisit the book. One more thing about the book. We have a few minutes left with Jim, Tony. About Mickey Mantle in the book. I mean, you were very truthful, Jim, about some of his weaknesses off the field, but few realized how really the complimentary overall you were in that book to him. But it seemed that you were kind of blacklisted, villainous to some people for, of course, talking that way about the great Mick,
For
right, Tony?
disturbing the illusion.
But is it true that the two of you did make peace after Mantle's son died, I think in '94, and you had a good relationship until Mickey himself passed?
Well, what happened was that, the biggest controversy in Ball 4 was I said Mickey Mantle hit a home run with a hangover.
Right.
And it was almost a story about what a great ball player he was. It wasn't, putting him down because he was hungover. He hit a home run with a hangover. I remember after the game I went over to him, I said, Mick, how did you do that? He says, it was pretty simple. I hit the middle ball. So,
That's greatness.
so that was a big controversy, and I remember when sports writers would go up to him, I would read about this in the paper, and they'd ask Mickey, "What do you think of Jim Bouton's book?" And I thought Mickey had a pretty good comeback. He said, "Jim who?"
Yeah.
So which is very funny, but the Yankees. I was banned from Old Timers Day for 28 years.
Yeah, that's right.
And then in 1996, I think it was Mickey's son Billy passed away.
Yes.
And I sent Mickey a note, saying I was really sad to hear about Billy. I had a nice memory of him as a polite little boy running around the clubhouse in spring training, and I said, and also I hope you're okay about Ball 4 these days. I said I never wrote it to hurt anybody, and I always considered it an honor to be your teammate. And I didn't expect to hear back from Mickey. I just wanted him to have this note. But, Mickey's not the kind of guy that reaches out very easily. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I came walking into my office, and my secretary is standing by the phone answering machine. She said, I want you to play this one for yourself. So I pressed the button, and it was Mickey Mantle. He said, hey, Jim, this in his Oklahoma twang. Hey, Jim, this is Mick. I just want you to know I appreciate your note about Billy. Thank you for that. Also, I want you to know I'm okay about Ball 4. It never really bothered me that much. And one more thing, he said, He said, I just want you to know I'm not the reason you don't get invited back to Old Timers Day. He said, I heard that going around. He said, I never said anything like that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, thanks for your note, Bud. Of course, I have it, and I'll save it. I'll give it to my grandchildren.
Sure.
So that was the, sort of a reconciliation with Mickey, and I was so pleased that he called me and we had that conversation. Otherwise, for the rest of my life, I would have just, felt badly that
question mark.
Sure.
That badly that Mickey, didn't have, was angry at me or something. And then a year after that, I lost my daughter in an automobile accident, Lori, and the following year, my son Michael wrote a letter to the New York Times saying that the Yankees should let bygones be bygones and invite me back to Old Timers Day. Michael wrote in this letter that Old Timers Day was always a time for families, and we've lost a member of our family, and my dad can use all the hugs he can get right now. And it was a beautiful letter, and so the Yankees really had no choice but to invite me to Old Timers Day. And so there I was, back in Yankee Stadium. And, when they call your name to run out on the foul line to join your teammates, all those legendary players,
Right.
And it's like it was 50,000 people there, or something like that, standing and cheering. It was a roar. My hearing went out. I lost my sense of balance. I thought I was going to fall down. I went out there to the foul line, and it was it was overwhelming experience. And then I looked into the upper deck in right field where I had left a whole bunch of tickets for Lori's girlfriends. Mm. And when I looked up there, they unfurled this huge banner, this blue banner with white lettering. It said, "We love Lori."
Wow.
And boy, I lost it right there.
Sure.
On the field.
Had to be just so emotional for you, Jim. I mean,
yeah.
First of all, to receive the ovation you did, and I remember in '98, it was just a standing ovation because of the years of banishment, and then for the whole thing with Jim's daughter, rest her soul. But what a story, and we're very sorry to hear that, of course. But Tony, we have a few more minutes, I guess.
Yeah, and Jim, and studying you and watching you as a young boy play with the Yankees, and then I'm going to proudly hold up here this hardcover edition of Ball 4. We used to fight over this in the high school library.
It is, sure.
Tonight I have my own, and I'm God blessed to have the author here to speak with. I watched you on television. I watched you do Big League Chew. I watched you come back with the Braves as an older pitcher, and where you're at right now, if a Martian were to come out of a spaceship and say, define for me Jim Bouton, who is Jim Bouton?
I don't know, but I don't really spend much time thinking about it. I'm too busy doing stuff. Mm-hmm. You might be interested to know that I still play baseball. I play vintage baseball played by 18th century rules, or 19th century rules, uniforms, and equipment. And I do pretty well. I'm 73, and I get guys out who are 35. Cause,
are you throwing the knuckleball?
I throw the knuckler, yeah.
That is great. That's
unbelievable.
Yeah, you had told me you believed he was still throwing, and
I watched you in I watched you in a semi-pro game in 1973 in Stamford, Connecticut, pitching for Teaneck.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. I played in it in amateur baseball in Jersey.
And
it's one of those things, it gets in your blood, and I just haven't been able to put the ball down yet.
Yeah, well, again,
we hope you never do, my friend.
Yeah.
We hope you never do.
He went from 70 to 78 out of the big leagues, and of course, Jim came back in 78 with the Bobby Cox-led Braves and actually had 5 starts and pitched almost 30 innings, giving up 25 hits, and it just never left his system, and we could see that it's still there. Jim, you've been more than generous with your time, and it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. And again, the memories that both of us have, and my father and all of our relatives here, you were such a part of our upbringing, and I know we probably only got to half the questions, and maybe we can have you on some other time, but we want to thank you again for your cooperation, and it's been an honor, and I speak from Tony on his behalf too. It's been an honor having you on and talking up to this point, and I hope we can stay in touch and talk again.
Yeah, that's fine, guys. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
It's our pleasure,
you so
Jim.
much.
Take
Our
care,
pleasure.
and we'll be in touch.
Okay,
Good
bye
night.
now.